Hey everyone, it's Chrono from the Headphone Show. Today with me I have the Campfire Audio Polaris. Let's check it out. Okay, so the Polaris is a mid-range offering from Campfire Audio. It's a hybrid IEM that retails for around $499. Now, before we begin, I wanted to specify that this is the V2 of the Polaris, and that's identifiable via its all-blue chassis, whereas the V1, I believe, had a gunmetal gray faceplate. So, as always, we'll start off by checking out its accessories. Well, one thing's for certain with the Polaris, and that's that you'll have plenty of ear tips to play around with and try out. Included with the Polaris are 11 sets of ear tips, 5 sets of final audio tips ranging from extra small to extra large, 3 sets of Campfire Audio marshmallow foam tips in small, medium, and large, and 3 sets of silicone tips, also in small, medium, and large. Additionally, a leather case is included, and it's finished in blue to match the Polaris' color scheme. It's fairly compact, though I wouldn't say it's particularly pocketable. Nonetheless, it's a nice inclusion that'll keep the IEM safe, and it also lends a slightly more premium feel. Lastly, there's the stock Campfire Audio Smoky Jacket Lids cable, which features a 3.5mm termination and MMCX connectors on the headphone side. One comment I'd like to add is that in my time with the Polaris, the cable did tend to get tangled up pretty easily, even when stored away neatly with the included Velcro strips. Now let's talk about build and comfort, and well, at least for the build, it's impressive, like really impressive. Despite coming in at nearly a third of the price, the craftsmanship displayed on the Polaris matches that of the IE900. It's assembled by hand in Oregon, featuring a machined aluminum chassis with a stainless steel sprout, a beryllium copper insulated MMCX connector, and a cerulean blue finish. Despite its rugged all-metal build though, it remains surprisingly lightweight. Comfort, although good, wasn't as impressive. I'd describe the Polaris as being a medium-sized IEM, as it's definitely larger than something like the IE900, but it's not quite as big as, say, the Blessing 2. Now, where I did run into some fit issues with the Polaris was actually mostly to its shape and contouring, as it has some pretty hard angle edges, and they would occasionally come in contact with my ear, which would cause some mild discomfort, and it would prompt me to adjust the fit of the IEM every now and then. So it's something worth keeping in mind if you're sensitive to that type of stuff. On the other hand though, all the included tips were actually pretty great to use, and thanks to the variety of sizes included, I doubt anybody will struggle to get a good fit with them. I think which set you use will depend on the kind of fit you prefer, and they will all have subtle differences in their tuning and level of isolation. Alright, so now let's talk about sound. And as I mentioned earlier, the Polaris is an IEM using a hybrid design that blends Campfire Audio's tuned acoustic expansion chamber with their polarity tuned chamber, as well as a 9.2mm dynamic driver and of course a balanced armature driver. Now, I've never been one to shy away from warm headphones like the HD650, LCD2, or even the Blessing 2. In fact, I love them. However, I personally think that the Polaris is a headphone that veers a bit into the wrong side of warmth and is a bit unbalanced. It's an extremely warm headphone that lacks some presence in the mid-range, yet at the same time, its treble is pronounced in a rather odd manner that makes for a somewhat confused listen as a whole. Alright, so let's first talk about the bass, which is undoubtedly what is most pronounced about the Polaris' frequency response. It's got an extreme bass shelf that is several decibels of what I personally consider to be neutral sounding. Now, of course, I know that we all have different preferences for the level of bass that we want from our headphones, and I will admit that on certain tracks, and sometimes it was really fun to have that pronounced bass response. However, unlike other headphones with a heavily emphasized lower bass response like the IE300, the bass elevation of the Polaris doesn't settle at around 150 to 180 Hz. Instead, the bass shelf just keeps going all the way to around 400 Hz, which results in a lot of upper bass bleed and makes for a slightly muddy bass to mid-range transition. As a whole, it's a bass response that feels lacking in restraint, and unfortunately, it does tend to overshadow the other registers of the frequency response. Now on to the mids. Due to the bass elevation that bleeds into the lower mids, as well as the relatively recessed upper mid-range, the mid-range of the Polaris does tend to feel as though it lacks definition and contouring. Its focus is definitely shifted towards the lower mid-range, of which elevation makes for bloated fundamental tones that come through with a congested quality to them. Additionally, since the presence region between 2 to 5K doesn't have much energy, it's unable to compensate for the boosted lower mids, which results in a stuffy mid-range presentation. This is a mid-range tuning that to me didn't feel organic, and it felt as though it took away some of the vibrance and bite out of vocals and instruments. Lastly, for frequency response, we have the highs, and despite being an IEM that is very warm overall, the treble range in the Polaris is surprisingly still prominent, though fairly uneven. Whilst the treble level is low, the Polaris does seem to have two emphasized frequency bands, with 6 and 8K having distinct peaks to them. Now, the first and more prominent peak is the one at 6K, which introduces some pretty noticeable glare, and it does add a stress to consonant sounds as well as to snare drums in particular. Then the peak at 8K wasn't quite as pronounced, but it did add some shimmer up top that wasn't very natural sounding. Now, I wouldn't say either of these elevations are harsh, but they did prove to be fatiguing, or at the very least very distracting over time. Moving on to technical performance, let's first talk about resolution. And for internal resolution, I think that the Polaris delivers performance that is not quite on par, but similar to that of the Chrono SA6. Vocal and instrument lines are fairly detailed, and they do feel adequately textured. However, due to that bloated bass to mid-range transition, as well as the glare produced by the 6K peak, I do feel as the tuning here holds back the Polaris from achieving the level of clarity that it really could. Moving along to soundstage imaging and layering. The soundstage in the Polaris is not quite as spacious as what I've experienced on the Chrono SA6 or from the Sennheiser IEMs I've tried, but it does have a presentation that feels a fair bit more spacious than that of the Blessing 2. In large part, I think that this is due to its clean imaging, as well as its ability to distinguish instrument lines in busy musical passages. Lastly, for technical performance, we have dynamics, and this is where I found the Polaris to perform its best. In fact, in this regard, I think that it's one of the best IEMs I've heard. The dynamic driver used here is very punchy, with a satisfying impact in the low end. However, it's not just bass tones that benefit from this, as the upper registers also have a very engaging and lively tactility, with a weighty snap and attack that gives instruments a more believable presence. It makes for a very energetic listen. Okay, so now to wrap up this review, the Polaris has an outstanding build, and I think that it delivers pretty solid technical performance for its price point. However, I found that the poorly balanced tuning overshadowed the positive qualities that it does have, and in the end it makes it difficult for me to recommend it. Me personally, I would stretch the additional $50 and reach for the Chrono SA6, as I think that it's a more well-rounded IEM. However, if we get to see a Polaris V3 in the near future, it would be really interesting to see if Campfire Audio can rein in this hybrid design and deliver both the tonality and technical performance that would make this a true contender in the $500 price range. Anyways, that is all for me today. I hope you enjoyed this video or found it useful. If you did, do consider dropping a like. If you'd like to learn more about the Polaris or other headphones, I highly encourage you to check out the review section available on headphones.com. For more headphone audio content, stay tuned by subscribing to the Headphone Show here on YouTube, and until next time, this is Chrono signing off.